Tere, lugupeetud kuulajad nii siin saalis kui ka veebis. Mul on väga hea meel tutvustada siis meie tänast esinejat. Ma nagu oleks mingisugune regulaarne saatejuht. Meie tänane esineja, kelleks on siis maastikuarhitektide liitude föderatsiooni president, doktor Bruno Marques, kes siis on siin, ma saan aru, tegemist on väga erakordse olukorraga, et ta on jõudnud siia Baltivaadesse. Ja mul on väga hea meel, et selle käigus on ta tulnud siis ka Tallinnasse ja siin tõesti Kristiina eestvedamisel teeb meile loengu. Et ma loodan, et aega jääb ka küsimusteks ja saab, ühesõnaga, teema ju väga-väga aktuaalne nii kliimamuutuste kui üldse linna kujunduse ja korralduse kontekstis. Aga I'm going to finish my words here and give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, tere hommikust. It's nice to be back in Estonia. For those that don't know, I used to live in Tallinn in another lifetime. Between 2006 and 2012, I was in this city, and it's nice to be back and see how things have changed. My name is Bruno Marques, and I am the president of the International Federation of Landscape Architects. I came all the way from New Zealand some weeks ago to be here with you this morning and share a little bit what the profession of landscape architecture is, where do we stand globally, what are the key initiatives happening across the world, in particularly with our partners, and then also to provide you a little bit of an overview of what are the key issues that the profession is trying to address. So I'm trying to speak a little slowly so everyone can follow. Apologies for that is in English, and by now is in English with a New Zealand accent that makes it even worse. But yeah, so the other thing I would like to say is thank you for the invitation to come to the City Council, and thank you as well, Christina, for dragging me here. It's nice to see your career blooming as well over the years. For those that don't know, Christina was my student back in the day. And also seeing some old friends in the audience is also nice. So, I am the 23rd president of IFLA. So IFLA has been around for a little while. We are this year celebrating our 75th anniversary. So IFLA was founded in 1948 and was founded 1 month before the International Union of Architects. If we always tend to compare ourselves with architects a little bit, just for you to note that those two global organizations have been around for about the same time. So when we talk about landscape architecture, these are the issues that we are reminded daily. They are very grim in nature, and wherever we live in the world, we are reminded about those daily. So the impact of globalization, urbanization, our impact of development around sustainability, food security, climate change, sea level rise, things that appear daily in our news, either if it's fires or droughts or we're suffering from floods. And most recently as well with the impacts of COVID around access to nature, access to landscape, access to outdoor spaces, in terms of our own health and well-being. So those are issues that require us to have a very powerful vision to protect our natural and built environment. And that is the remit of landscape architecture. So landscape architects are the ones that deal with primarily those issues to make sure that our natural and built environment will be here for the generations to come, for your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and whoever is going to be here on this planet afterwards. So while the profession has developed quite a lot over the decades, and I was just talking with the deputy mayor that over even the last 10 years in Estonia, the perception of landscape architecture has changed dramatically, we still have a long way ahead of us. We are indeed the profession of the 21st century. We know that we are well equipped to understand what nature gives us, how to deal with the built environment, how to bring those two realities together. in order to allow us to have new ways of living, new ways of designing, and having livable environments around us. IFLA, as the only international non-governmental organization, represents landscape architects in the world, and one of the things that I've been trying to tell everyone as I go through is IFLA does not exist with its members. So it's all of us working together to develop, protect, and expand the profession as we go through. In our case, here in Estonia, the Estonian Landscape Architects Association is our valuable partner that makes sure that locally those issues are responded and addressed from their point of view, but we all, as I say, we are all pedaling in the same direction. So it doesn't matter if we don't act locally and globally simultaneously, we can't really make an impact, or we can't really have a change. In that regard, as a global federation, the bodies we work with, they're all international in nature. So we work very closely with the United Nations and all the sub-agencies, particularly UN Habitat, UNESCO and ICOMOS. They are probably one of our oldest partners since 1971. IFLA has a joint scientific committee on cultural landscapes with ICOMOS that looks into assessment of cultural landscapes to then be included in UNESCO World Heritage Protection lists. We also work very closely with FAO, so that's the Food and Agriculture Organization, IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and also with UIA, so the Union of Architects and the planners as well. So we are all addressing same issues. We are all here because we want to address the issues that we are reminded daily, and we want to make sure that the planet will survive that and will be here for the future generations. So this, I think, is quite an important reminder. We all like numbers, and I think numbers here are very important to understand the scope and the breadth of the landscape profession. So we are not as small as people may think about, and we are not beautifiers or decorators, adding little flowers here and there to make things beautiful. So IFLA represents 78 member organizations. We organize in 5 regions. So we have the IFLA Americas region in red. In blue, you have IFLA Europe. Down below brown, IFLA Africa. In the middle, IFLA Middle East in purple. And then IFLA Asia Pacific in yellow. So we have about 50,000 landscape architects in our membership. However, globally, through the International Labour Organization, they expect there is about 1 million landscape architects in the world. So again, we are not as small as many people think, and we are way beyond landscape gardening as the stereotype may indicate. What we are concerned about as an organization is to make sure that we really promote the highest levels of education, research, training, and professional practice. That are the 4 core issues that IFLA always focus on to make sure the profession is well represented and that we all are contributing to the growth of that same profession. So one of the things that is also important to retain here is that landscape architects are quite broad as a profession, and that it's a blessing and is also an issue in a certain extent. So every time we need to understand locally who we work with, we will probably tap into at least 4 or 5 ministries. If you think about generally agriculture, environment, planning issues that generally connected to finances or social development. So there is a broad range of departments that we need to act with. And it's the same story internationally. When we need to act with the United Nations, we at least have 4, 5, 6 different agencies that we work with, because we are so broad in nature as a profession, and also that makes things exciting. It's where we can find those interfaces that we can really come with something exciting and creative. So as I said before, in terms of the importance of IFLA, there's many things that we are interested on. So for us to operate, we need to have a functional structure, we need to have a functional secretariat, and then through our regions, they can act at more regional level to address certain issues. It has been quite an interesting journey. I've been trying to talk to all of our delegates, all the 78 of them, and everyone thinks that the problems they have in their country are very specific to their country. But I can tell you that 80% of the issues reported to me are exactly the same. Regardless if the profession exists for 100 years or 5 years, it's always issues around visibility, raising the profile, acknowledgement, protection of the interests of landscape architects, legal frameworks that protect the work we do. So they are all very similar issues around the countries that we deal with. So in terms of how do we define ourselves and our core of action as an organization, so we always think ourselves as a thought leader, so we need to reach out to the profession, connect. We see ourselves as a hub. We bring people together, facilitate those discussions, and as I said previously, it's important sometimes for countries to share that knowledge because they are most likely dealing with similar issues. And then we act globally to make sure that we are lobbying and pushing the agenda through of landscape architecture with those that we need to work with. In that way, the three key actions that we have internally is always around excellence corporate governance to make sure that we have a structure, we have an action plan, we have monthly deliverables that we are accountable for. We provide services to our members, through training, education, networking, to make sure that everyone is up to speed with the recent trends around the profession. And also we look into raising the profile of the profession. So that is a wide range of activities, including coming here to Estonia to make sure that a stronger voice is heard around the issues that the profession is facing locally. I would like to share with you as well recent milestones. These are things that happened over the last 12 months. This is just a little summary. There is more, and I think those are just the most important. The first one is that there is a new definition for landscape architecture through the International Labour Organization. So the last time we did that was probably 20 years ago. So the definition is far more reaching in nature, really addresses the different facets of the profession, from the designing, the planning, the management, the implementation side of landscape architecture. We also rolled out a new global education, recognition and accreditation program. So if universities come to us and ask, okay, so what do we need to teach a landscape architect? We provide them the support to set up that curriculum, and we provide them the first step of recognition, and 5 years down the track, we ask them to come back and show us examples of those outcomes, especially student work, so we can then provide full accreditation of that program. The other thing, as I mentioned before, is ICOMOS and UNESCO. We have a long-lasting relationship with those two agencies, and we also have strengthened our position across many UN agencies. And for instance, at the last COP27 on climate change that happened in Egypt around September, we passed a motion with United Nations to establish landscape architecture-led design framework for climate change and adaptation. So that, I think, is quite an important milestone where the United Nations is saying part of the climate change issues we're having, landscape architecture is one of those that will help us to address those issues. Later on, 2 months later, COP15 for biodiversity. So if you get lost with all the COPs, as I do, generally one is for climate change, and then the next one is for biodiversity. One is organized by United Nations, the other one by the International Union of Conservation of Nature. So the later one in Canada that happened in early December, we have a voting status with IUCN. So we also passed a motion with their membership that we should be looking at nature-based solutions to address issues around biodiversity and green infrastructure solutions. So I think that those two things were quite an important milestone. We also signed an MOU, so Memorandum of Understanding, with the International Society for Urban Health. So they are a subset of the World Health Organization, and they are the ones that are very much interested on any urban health and well-being issues from all the different facets of the built environment. So Landscape Architecture now is a partner with ISUH and therefore with WHO. And more recently, so this is definitely happened a week ago at the UN Habitat General Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, they accepted our proposal on the development of International Landscape Convention. So for those of you part of the European Union, you know that Europe set up a European Landscape Convention about 10 plus years ago. Estonia ratified that in 2018. But now we are looking internationally. Can we have something like that across the world where we protect the importance of our landscapes? Landscapes that provide us sustenance, provide us access to food, water, resources, and survival overall. So this is a project that has been on the back burner for a little while. We started 10 years ago with UNESCO and ICOMOS, and we got their support. But as you know, politically, things change, new people come in, and then willingness of doing something goes away. But now we are back on track with the International Landscape Convention, and I think that is also a very important issue to address. In terms of our global focus, what you see here is nothing really outstanding. Any global organization is focusing on those issues, but at the same time, those are very valuable issues to focus on. So we are looking into climate action and biodiversity, health, well-being and nature-based solutions, community participation, technology and evidence-based design, food security, and traditional knowledge and indigenous practices. We believe that those 6 key points would really help us to address most of the issues that society is facing at the moment. And we are also seeing that these are issues that are permeated through from the top down, so from international organizations to local governments, and then all the way down and across our partners, we are all talking the same language. And I think it's quite important because it just strengthens and really teases out the importance of looking into those issues. And also the fact that through those, we also have been reported that many countries and many of our partners are focusing on the development on climate action guidelines, nature-based guidelines, community participation guidelines, so really helping cities and councils and society at large to really focus on how to address those issues through the means of landscape architecture or design overall. Another issue that we have is most of our partners are reporting a shortage of landscape architects, including here in Estonia, where most of the firms I've been talking to have been telling me that we don't have enough landscape architects for the demand of the market. And that's a similar issue on many, many countries in the world. So we really need to push the agenda through that universities need to keep educating landscape architects. So in terms of the first topic, I just want to give you an overview of each one so you understand where we stand globally. We have been noticing that governments, clients and organizations have moved towards developing various initiatives to support real outcomes, but those initiatives at times also haven't been working properly. We noted through the biodiversity COP in Montreal, many issues were discussed around carbon emissions, but also we start looking at a change towards looking or addressing biodiversity, greenhouse gases, water, food security. It's not that everyone is getting tired of climate change. It's an issue that will remain important, but we are now trying to understand climate change in relation to other issues. From a landscape architecture point of view, we know that landscape architects will continue to focus on problems around flooding, drought, biodiversity, heat island effect, and really trying to come up with nature-based solutions to address those. We're also noticing that more and more firms and also clients are expecting that our projects really address the carbon footprint, address emissions, address biodiversity. And as I said earlier, members within IFLA, like the American Society of Landscape Architects or the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects or the Landscape Institute in the UK, they're all providing policies and tools for landscape architects to assist in reducing those carbon emissions. So there's many apps being developed, many guidelines being developed to really enable landscape architects to see what changes do they need to do to their projects to really address some of those outcomes. We're also looking into a change from monoculture, urban forests, to more species diversity to really address the carbon offsets. We're also looking at many clients that come to us with ideas around sourcing of materials locally and materials that have probably low impact in terms of carbon. And I think the overall idea here is that we, as architects of the environment, as I tend to call us, because it's a little more relatable to architects overall, is that our profession is really well prepared to address the climate change needs and biodiversity needs that we are facing globally. In terms of health, well-being, and nature-based solutions, I think this is a topic that really came into the forefront around COVID and the post-COVID environment that we are part now, when most the countries globally, people were depleted of accessing nature, so they were locked indoors. And many issues really exacerbated from that, and I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg trying to understand the impact in our health and well-being around that. Also, at the same time, many governments realized that nature solutions alone, like reforestation, wetlands, mangroves, they are not enough to reach the carbon goals of 2030. So there's many things that now we are looking into how to embed more nature, more biodiverse strategies, more sustainable strategies to really provide not only access to nature, but also to provide that augmented access to physical and mental health, as we know that exposure to nature reduces many of our stress, many of our chronic illnesses, and things like that. So many governments and public agencies are really looking at new strategies on how to embed nature in urban settings and how much of that will contribute not only to the population at large, but also how addressing certain aspects of demographics like elderly population, ethnic minorities, individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders. So there's a huge range of things. In terms of WHO, they tell us that in a global context, 90% of our total healthcare costs, so that's us, taxpayers, paying for that, and through the governmental budgets that are allocated to health. So 90% of the healthcare costs are spent on 30% of the population with chronic diseases. So these are people that suffer from obesity, low mobility, elderly people that are afraid of walking outside because they will fall and break a bone. So many of those issues can potentially be addressed through nature-based solutions, and we're seeing lots of countries investing on nature-based solutions to reduce the cost on a healthcare budget. Another issue that is equally important to us is definitely community participation, so to make sure that all the different voices are heard as part of the consultation processes, but also especially rural communities, because those are the ones that tend to be more deprived of resources and also more exposed to change, especially around climate change. So we know that community engagement is good because the design outcome is far richer. It encompasses a wide range of views and solutions and perspectives, and everyone that has been involved in that process, they feel part of the project. Therefore, they feel that the outcome that is implemented was developed by them. And I think that really is important from a landscape point of view, that we, in bringing that knowledge on board, those values, we really make sure that the project and the outcome of that project is far more sustainable and inclusive. I will talk a little more any other topic on Indigenous knowledge, but for instance, in Australia and New Zealand, there is no way to get a project approved without having community participation, without especially Indigenous tribes to approve those projects. If they don't tick the box, there's no way that project will ever go ahead. In terms of technology and evidence-based design, I think this is probably the most hot topic with all the recent developments around technology, especially artificial intelligence. But also we're at the point that it's not enough just to have pretty projects and implement pretty projects. People want evidence that whatever we told them that will be working, they want evidence that is working. So they want numbers. And I think that's kind of good in a way, because then we can prove that those projects are really catering for what we said they would be doing. We notice a lot of development of apps around climate positive design, carbon conscious design, so apps that allow us to understand what's the carbon footprint of our projects and what can we do to change that in terms of looking at alternative materials, permeable solutions, local species for planting, things that can really intensify and reduce our carbon footprint. Other things that start to be very important for landscape architects is building information management, and we see that quite a lot coming across, where BIM becomes quite an important product to allow our allied professionals to work together, contractors, facility managers, and that is something that I think is going to stay for a little while. Digital twins, we are in a country of technology. That's something that I think is very important worldwide, and there's many tools and gizmos and toys appearing every day that really allow us to have a more reliable spatial data collection, but also visualization of that data that can be interesting for the projects we do, and also to understand in a real-time situation how much of those projects will address climate change, increased, reduced public transportation use, biomass, all those issues. One thing that we predict that will especially be quite important around 2025, 2027 will be post-occupancy evaluations. That's something that is a little more common in architecture, but I think everyone now out there, especially clients, really want us to show them how much that design is catering for what we told them that we'll be doing. So trying to understand and provide numbers that the design is really working to the extent that was expected. Artificial intelligence, probably like the one that everyone is petrified at the moment. Will AI replace us? Maybe in the long term. I don't think that is going to happen anytime soon. It can't really replace the experience of someone going to a place and how do they feel about that place. But I think it can be an interesting tool. It can be an interesting tool to generate design solutions to allow us to really then assess, is this good, is this bad? So the way we see it is that it will be a tool like any other for the time being that really allow us to have that fluency of ideas and outcomes in a much efficient and quicker manner. Food security, I think this is one that's quite alarming and we tend to forget quite a lot. So looking at the OECD countries, so the developed countries in the world, 1 in 6 people are food insecure. And I think this is quite alarming when we think about places like Tallinn, how many of our citizens that live here don't have access to food in a proper manner. So we are seeing a lot of practices changing from intensification of farming to more sustainable alternatives, and those that particularly look into soil protection and would allow erosion to stop in many different ways. So local policies and design solutions can definitely help to promote this outcome and provide access to rural land and more regenerative agroecology, also allow us to capture carbon in urban soils and improve biodiversity. We are seeing landscape architects at this stage changing their approach to increase the resilience of their projects, for instance, vacant retail and commercial spaces to be adapted as hybrid models of farming in urban setting, public spaces that can be rethought to accommodate the harvesting of crops, and that's a practice that is very common in Asia. Residential gardens and terraces that have great potential for home-based food production, rooftops that can be designed to accommodate vegetable gardens, and so on, so on, so on. So there's many alternatives there. But I think here it's our mandate as a profession to create sustainable and equitable food systems that ensure everyone has access to food as we go forward and as the world keeps growing and our cities become far more complex in nature than what they currently are. Finally, this is a topic that sometimes we don't really engage that much with because we see indigenous and we think, oh, we don't have indigenous people, so we're out, we don't need to think about this. But I think it's more than just indigenous people. We are talking about traditional knowledge that our forefathers had on how to use the land, how to protect sustainability and biodiversity, things that our grandparents used to do and we no longer do. So traditional knowledge is that cumulative body of knowledge and practices related to the natural environment, and is connected to specific geographical areas, and it's developed by people and is generally oral in nature, so it's transmitted orally to the next generation. And that's something that UNESCO is very concerned about, because traditional knowledge is rapidly disappearing. So UNESCO estimates that 43% of the 6,000 languages spoken in the world are endangered at this stage. So smaller ethnic groups, countries that have shrinking population, and I think this is something of concern to Estonia as well. So we are losing that knowledge, because unfortunately most of it has not been written by anyone. So where I'm coming from, in New Zealand, we engage a lot with our traditionalist people because they have the knowledge of 4 or 5 centuries on how to sustainably manage the land. So things that we used to know, access to waterways, for food security, wetlands, forests, things that are very important from a landscape architecture point of view, they remind us that we need to have those back to promote sustainability of our landscape. So we need to think about changing that intensification of farming and to a little more sustainable practices. But there is lots of knowledge as well coming from them that allow us to think about climate change a little differently. And we are in an interesting journey with them to really look into how to bring that knowledge and how to apply it to address some of those big issues that we have there. So, as you probably realize, it has been quite busy for the last 12 months, and I don't think it's going to change. So this is pretty much the list of things that we'll be focusing on this year. One of the things IFLA will keep doing is definitely raising the profile of the profession internationally. We are now working on professional standards and registration. So that means if you are a landscape architect from Estonia, want to go to New Zealand, we are trying to simplify that process, that your education is recognized, that your practice is recognized, and you can easily move around. So we are now developing those professional standards and code of conduct, and then later on understanding if a system of registration or charters or licensing will be able to be implemented worldwide. We'll keep working alongside the many projects that global and international organizations have to increase the visibility and advocacy of landscape architecture. We are working particularly closely with emerging countries to assist them to set up their own educational programs and address those future challenges of the profession. Particularly, we have been focusing quite a lot in Africa, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Middle East, and also some countries in Southeast Asia, to make sure that they have the necessary support so they can actually do the correct job of educating landscape architects. We're also trying to bridge. There's currently a gap in IFLA, which is the separation of universities from the professional body. So we're trying to bring universities closer to IFLA, and there's many advantages here. General academics invest lots of time doing very interesting research projects, but then there's no application of those research projects. So we're trying to bring them closer to the practitioners that generally have no time to do that. They can then take that knowledge and apply it and feedback to academia. So at the moment that loophole is not connected, and we're trying to address that. Also trying to bring universities closer to this hub, because as I said, IFLA is a knowledge hub where we want that knowledge to be shared and participated. In terms of key lessons, one of the things that you realize, I don't know how many of you are landscape architects in the audience, but generally we are all very passionate about landscape architecture. And I think that's very important because it makes us a little more humble as a profession, but at the same time, I think we need to be a little more aggressive in the way we portray ourselves to the external world. And the reason why is because we are so nice and humble people, we tend to be bogged down by society overall, and that at times does not pay an advantage to us as a profession. So I think it's important for us to know who we are, and I think we know who we are, but it's also very important for us to be part of those discussions where we need to be and not be ignored. There's many important expertise and knowledge that we have as a profession, and I think what you are now facing globally is that landscape architects are leading projects. They are not part of a subcommission, but in the contrary, because of their training, their expertise, they are leading those teams. And they are the ones that bring together the engineers, the planners, the architects, and in many countries, landscape architects are paid much higher than an architect. So the future is looking bright, and I think we need really to all work together to maintain that. And I think that's why IFLA and the local professional bodies are very important for that, because they help to really develop the profile of the profession and to keep us in the right track. So I'm approaching the end, and I'm leaving you with some wise words or Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe. For those that don't know who Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe is, he was the founder member of IFLA in 1948. So IFLA was founded in Cambridge, England, and he said, probably around 1970s, I think, that the landscape architect who was first called a landscape gardener is still surely wrongly appreciated. And I think we are kind of still in the same feeling, 40 years, 50 years down the track, still in the same feeling. But I can definitely tell you that landscape architecture is way beyond gardening. Actually, most of us do little gardening, maybe in our spare time at home if we have a garden in our property. But it's more about the planning and designing and the big vision of our open spaces. And we can't forget that all our buildings where we are now, they sit on the landscape. So if we place buildings in the wrong place, if we don't understand the impact of those, that's very, very dramatic for the future of our cities. So landscape architects can help with that. They can help envisioning the future of our cities, anything from small scale, from streets to parks, schools, roads, to commercial, industrial, to full neighborhoods, to full cities. That's what we are comfortable with dealing as a profession. And I think, like our landscapes and ecosystems, we are also a resilient community, and through our collaborative efforts, we definitely will keep raising the profile of the profession globally. It's also a year of celebration, as I said in the beginning, so there is many things happening this year because it's our Diamond Jubilee year, and we are having this crazy thing this year it's exciting at the same time. We are having a bilateral congress, so we'll be in 2 different locations simultaneously. So you can decide if you want to go to Stockholm, just around the corner, or if you want to come to Nairobi, Kenya, and do a safari and see all these crazy animals. But we will be having the same program, different locations. We'll be live streamed in both directions, so no one will miss anything. Or if you don't want to travel anywhere, the third option is to join online. We're also having a series of webinars before that really help us to understand the past, so where we come from as a profession and how much of IFLA has changed the profession and the roles, but also looking at the future of education, the future of professional practice, and you can go just to the website and find more details as they come through. And finally, I really like to have any feedback, any comments. If there's anything that you think we should be focusing on as a global federation, drop me a line. I'm very happy to hear your thoughts. Or even if you want to be part of one of our projects. We are not a private club. We have many working groups focusing on climate change and biodiversity, landscape architects without borders, doing important work in Ukraine and Turkey and countries where, unfortunately, the politics do not allow for people to do their profession properly. Green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, professional standards, those are all open to anyone that wants to contribute to the discussion. So if you want to join any of that, please let me know. Happy to accommodate any feedback or ideas on that. And that's me. Thank you. I'm sure there will be some questions.
I hope so. Yes, thank you, Bruno. Do we have any questions on the audience? Everything is bright clear as usually in Estonia. But
everyone is afraid of asking the question in English.
Yeah, I should try. I have one question. You already told me that in New Zealand you're trying to collect this knowledge from the century. And you also told me that people in New Zealand and in Estonia are quite similar.
Yeah, a little bit in nature, yeah.
But how?
Well, New Zealand is this fascinating place. So imagine like England, the US, and the Nordic countries had a baby together. So that's New Zealand. So we have certain things we are very English, like more English than the English. Other things we are very American, but other things we are very Nordic. Like in terms of like social values, community welfare, anything related to people, we are very, very Nordic in approach. Our planning process is probably as slow as the Nordic countries. Like everything takes ages before it gets implemented because it needs to be debated, redebated, approved, reapproved, and every time you implement something, it's 10 years down the track. So landscape architects have no stress in New Zealand because they know that things will take time. Every time they need to do something, it's going to take at least 5 years. It's not like in Asia that they improve something and 2 days later it's built. But in that regard, so New Zealand has, what's different in New Zealand is compared to Australia, when Australia was colonized, they pretty much deported all the prisoners from the UK to Australia. So New Zealand was colonized almost a century later compared to Australia. And what they did is that when they arrived there, they found our indigenous people that were already there for almost 3 centuries. And they signed this treaty between the British Crown and the Maori tribes. At the time, we had 521 Maori tribes across the country. The problem is in that treaty. The treaty from the English side said, you are giving away your sovereignty and we are giving you the protection as the British Empire. But for the Maori people that had no concept of ownership, they did not own things, they saw it as we are sharing our resources with the white people. So fundamentally, there's an issue in that treaty straight away, in a way it was written and conceived. So a lot of the work since 1974 has been about the reconciliation of that. So the tribes, what happened in 100 years quickly was pushed away from your land. We need this land for farming, for sheep and beef grazing. We're going to put you somewhere in land that nothing to do with your ancestors, nothing to do with where you grew up for 2 or 3 centuries. And that created lots of stigma. So if you imagine that for Maori people, once they talk to you, they don't tell you, my name is whatever, they tell you, this is my mountain, this is my river, this is where I'm coming from. So they tell you, this is my land, this is the land that I grew up with and has been on my family for generations. So when you push them away from that, all the invisible information of that landscape, like the oral narratives, because it's all about place naming, the connection, the ancestors, all of that, we are putting them in a totally different place. We'll be like, we take Estonian people and drop them in Portugal. So it will be a little bit like that. So there's lots of stigma that generated. So since 1974 in New Zealand, tribes can claim grievance from the government or from the British Crown. So what they do is they go back to all the records and they find where originally their land was and they try to give it back to them as much as they can. If they can't give it all back, they generally compensate them financially. And it's big sums. It's millions of dollars that they get, but it's for their tribe. And what they do, they invest their money on fixing the landscape. So they invest the money in fixing what the white people did to them, which is restoring the waterways, restoring wetlands, restoring, giving access to the land as almost used to be. So this is kind of interesting, fascinating process where literally the tribes are suing the government for what they did to them. So in this case, the government is the face of the crown, of the British Crown, because we still have the king as our head of state. So they are suing the crown and saying, we want compensation for what you did for 150 years. So it's quite interesting process. And Australia is trying to do a little bit that, but Australia doesn't have that treaty, so we are all forced and bound to that treaty. Even in whatever we do, at governmental level, at university level, we need to make sure that those two sides are represented in everything we do. So every time we design something, you need to make sure that the Maori values are included in the process. And it's sometimes like it's this tokenistic approach of, oh, we're just going to add these little patterns here and there, and it ticks the box. That doesn't work. That doesn't work anymore. So it's really involving them in a discussion, and they want to be part of that discussion since day one. So they want to be part of the process, they want to feedback in every step of the way, because then for them, that is their ancestral knowledge being reflected in that project, and that's what makes the project their project. And so there's no way to get a project approved in New Zealand and in anything without that. That's why it takes a little more time.
Yeah, it's probably, you called it the genius loci differently,
It is.
like a knowing.
That sense of place and sense of belonging is very, very important. And what they don't want is that homogenization of the landscape, that everything is going to look the same, because every tribe, even though the country is not, it's big in size but not in population, what they don't want is that a place up north is going to look exactly the place like down south, because the tribes have different traditions, different knowledge, different regional identities, so they want to make sure that's respected. So yeah, so it's a fascinating place.
Yeah, it seems to me that we have a lot to learn.
Well, I think in that regard, yes. Like it's like almost like going back to your roots. And another thing in New Zealand is that, due to colonization, like any plant that you have here that we have in Europe, if we transport it there, it sprawls like weeds and it kills everything. So we had this big issue in the 1980s in New Zealand where the biodiversity was at risk because the exotic species were annihilating anything that was local. And then what happened was we went through this phase of go native. So no exotic species, everything that's local. So if you go there, if you see trees, falling leaves, changing colors, you know that those are not from there straight away. So the typical New Zealand vegetation is evergreen. Everything is green all year round, which is very boring because you don't understand the seasons. Everything is green all the time. But was problematic because it was killing the biodiversity. So New Zealand had no pests, no mammals before the Europeans arrived. So all our birds, native birds, they almost lost the capacity of flying because there was no predators. So there were these very clumsy flyers. Every time they go, it sounds like bombs dropping because they are very clumsy in the way they fly. So then when Europeans arrived, introduced mammals, the mammals like stoats and rats and possums, they start eating the eggs and the population start declining. At the same time, the tree population, the native trees start declining as well because the trees were depending on the birds to eat the seeds and spread the seeds. So there was no birds, trees were declining. So all of that was interlinked, and it was really a mandate by the government. So we can't use exotic species in public projects. You can probably have them in your garden if it's a tiny little garden, but if it's a big garden, that's problematic as well. So everything is very controlled in that way because anything that's not from that ecosystem, it just sprawls like there is no tomorrow.
Yeah, we are lucky that our tuyas is not like weeds. Okay, you also told us about climate change and showed the picture, and also it concerns the food security. We actually don't talk much about soil here, but I know that in world we have big problems already that we don't have enough soil to grow food. What about, is it real or?
Well, yesterday I met with 4 different ministries here in Tallinn, and one of the things that I was made aware of is there's a new soil law coming through in Estonia, as mandated by the European Union. So there was lots of work they were reporting on, looking at soil protection for biodiversity, soil protection for farming, and all those different aspects. One of the things that was very interesting in all the stuff that we talked yesterday is that in all those different aspects, including ecosystem services from the Ministry for the Environment, they all forgot the urban setting. Or the urban setting was those areas that no one really know who is responsible for that, who is dealing with what. Is it under the spatial planning team or is it under somewhere else? So that was kind of interesting at the same time. That they didn't know what to do with the cities at this stage. But internationally, definitely, soil is a big problem. Like you have countries losing soil mass very, very, very quickly. To the point, and soil is a non-renewable thing. Once you lose it, you lose it. There's no way to bring it back. So I think that's very dramatic, and I think it's definitely one of those aspects we need to consider, not only for food security, but for security of everyone in the future. And yeah, so many countries are looking at that very, very carefully in terms of biodiversity, soil protection. In terms of climate change, I was told yesterday that it's not really a hot topic in Estonia yet. It's not a hot topic per se in New Zealand as well, but what the and I think here there's a good indication by setting up a ministry for climate that you know that it's on a radar. And in New Zealand was also something similar that happened last year, because we need to act now if we want to make sure that in 50 years we will have a planet to live. Because any indication, any numbers that comes through, any attempt to do anything has had very little impact so far. So we need to take this very seriously, because it's not little things that we are doing here and there. It needs to be big things that we do all together, and all the countries doing stuff, because we are putting at risk that there is no planet to live, and there is no second planet as well. This is the only planet we have. So it's very dramatic, I think, but I think we need to be a little more proactive on that regard. You see that at United Nations, so all the discussions is always around climate change. That's kind of the big, big thing. Sometimes too much, in my opinion, like sometimes they forget about all the other stuff, but I think it's a big issue, and I think we have not been taking that seriously, and I think we need to.
Okay, is there any question now from audience?
Yeah. What have changed?
Tell me your name and what you do.
What I'm doing?
Yeah, what's your profession?
Well, I'm making the city more beautiful here.
Yeah. So you are a landscape architect or urban designer?
No,
Yeah.
I'm just a specialist here. So
Okay.
I'm not an architect.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I just wanted to ask that, what has changed the most in Tallinn since you were here last?
A lot.
Okay. Because I understood that you have lived here.
Yeah, I lived here from 2006 to early 2012. And then I was in the same city as Remy was in London. A lot, I think. Like, definitely the waterfront has probably been the most dramatic change, because we're very close from the waterfront. Anything that was water, there was an obstacle in a way that we couldn't really interact with. I think anything from here towards where the museum is, the Maritime Museum, and all those areas, yeah, that all changed dramatically. I think the city has become more denser. There's more buildings than what used to be. I think the quality of the open spaces have also improved. There's been some changes here and there, but the overall quality, I think, has improved. There is definitely more emphasis on sustainable mobility as well. Like, you can see cycle lanes here, bus lanes there. Like, when I was here, it was very car dominated still, and public transportation was not free at that stage yet. So there's been some changes. And I think, like, what I like about the Estonian landscape architecture is that it has that Nordic flavor, that aesthetics of the Nordic countries. Very different from, I was just coming from Lithuania and Latvia, where I was for the last 8 or 9 days. The way they see landscape architecture is different. You can see that from the material selection, the plant palette, even the construction finishings. it's very different from Estonia. Yeah.
More questions? Last one
Yeah.
from me.
Yeah.
What do you want to say to Estonian landscape architecture?
Well, many things. I think the profession has definitely evolved quite a lot since I was living here. There's, I think, more awareness of what landscape architects do. I think we need to be more assertive to the public and to our peers in terms of what we do as a profession. It's all about educating people. You know, we can't expect that everyone knows what everyone does in their profession. So I think we need to raise visibility and awareness of what we do. And sometimes starts by even engaging with high school students and just show them the potential of the profession. We still unfortunately have that very strong stereotype of we are just gardeners. And I think that has nothing to do with the reality of the profession. And we've been doing that a lot in New Zealand, engaging with high schools, and when they really see what we do as a profession, they get very excited. And especially, I think the generation coming through now, they are very environmental conscious and they are very climate conscious because they are afraid of the future. I don't know if you are aware of that, but climate refugees is something that the world is discussing quite a lot. You know, in New Zealand, our biggest city, Auckland, they expect 500,000 people to move to Auckland as climate refugees. So now in 10, 15 years, you're going to have an extra 500,000 people. The pressures on an urban environment is very, very high because the cities are not prepared for that. They expected growth, but not to that extent. So I think the generation coming through, they are very conscious and very concerned because they don't know what the future is going to look like. So I think that as our profession, I think we have the mandate to really engage them in those discussions. And I think there's definitely, we need more landscape architects in Estonia, I think as well. We need more numbers. And more numbers mean then more stronger lobbying in the places that we need to lobby. But it has changed a lot. I think there's been a positive change, so we just need to keep that going, the momentum going.
Yeah. With IFLA's help, of course.
Oh, definitely, yeah. That's why we're here. Like, as I said, IFLA can't exist without its members, and it's our, our obligation to make sure that our members are protected and catered for.
Yeah. So, thank you. And I asked that is this 3.5 kilo things suit your suitcase?
Yeah.
So you said you have enough space.
Yeah.
And I would say that thank you.
Pleasure.
To asking me that question. It was 2013.
Yeah.
That what are you waiting to?
Yeah.
To do Tallinn.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was the one that forced her to apply for the job here, so I'm the responsible one for her to be here. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be back, and yeah, as you know, I have this special connection to Estonia, so it's always good to be back and see how things have improved and changed. Thank you, everyone.